So there is a world where this title could be more dramatic. This is not financial advice. We're not saying that we're no longer in a bull run, but essentially what this is going to be about is if we don't have the luxury of being in a bull run where everything is green, everything is going up, life is good, how do LRTs actually grow? And by the way, my name is Soufia and I'm the head of DeFi at Kelp DAO. Let's kind of start from the start. What is EigenLayer? So essentially, EigenLayer is an infrastructure that allows essentially a shared security that we can send to AVSs. But before we kind of get there, why did we need an EigenLayer? So essentially, any protocol that requires validation in the past, such as oracles, bridges, rollups, had to essentially gather a validator set. This was an extremely competitive and expensive process and very fragmented, right? So what EigenLayer said is, hey, why don't we pool these validators together and send security to these AVSs, which is a very fancy term for actively validated service, essentially any protocol that requires validation. So you as the staker would essentially pledge your assets to an operator of your choice. You can select this operator based on the AVSs that they support. So you can kind of think about this as some sort of index fund via operators. That selection choice can be as a result of wanting to select the most secure AVSs or the ones least prone to slashing, or the AVSs that you predict will have the highest earning tokens. So if it's so simple to essentially stake with EigenLayer, then why do you need LRTs? There's a couple of reasons. Let's start with the most fundamental one, which is that as a staker, when you're pledging your assets, you also want to remain liquid. Remaining liquid allows you to further engage into DeFi. So you're basically earning your native APR from Beacon, which is about 3 to 4%. And then you're also able to get even more yield in various different DeFi opportunities. In the near future, in the next quarter or so, these AVSs will start to issue out rewards that will go towards the stakers and the LRTs, and then this will be infused in our native APR. I will dive into why that's important in a second. And then obviously as an LRT, our mission is to create a liquid environment amongst a lot of L2s and L1s. So what does this DeFi environment look like? So on the precipice, it's quite basic. Essentially, when you pledge your assets to Kelp, we issue an LRT token called RSETH. So the benefit of having RSETH is that you can essentially use RSETH across DeFi. So on DEXs, lending markets, sophisticated money markets like Pendle, all of these opportunities would obviously engage you into further yield. And then we basically repeat this cycle on all the L2s. Recently, we started taking more of a concentrated approach towards L2s, given that their lifespan is getting shorter and shorter. Previously, we wanted to be on every single money market. Now we're choosing one DEX, one lending, and seeing how that goes until TGE. Little quick snapshot of Kelp, where we are today. We currently have 1.8 billion TVL, so that's essentially 1.8 billion of locked assets of RSETH on DEXs, lending, Pendle, etc. We're actually on more than 9 L2s, and we're not on Polygon, so sorry about that. I think we currently support about 12 L2s right now, and 2 L1s, so that's Ethereum and Berachain. All-time high TVL of 2.3 when ETH was doing a lot better. So how do you stay ahead of the competition? It's not for the faint of heart. TLDR, it's a very, very competitive space. So where do we compete? LRTs essentially compete for the same liquidity providers, so whales, funds, institutions. We compete for the same lending markets to be able to borrow prime assets like ETH and LitoETH. That process is fairly complicated in the sense that we have to essentially go through their like diligence. We have to be approved by their risk managers, and then sometimes you also have to make some configurations. We also want the same first mover advantage on these L2s. Obviously, being there first has its advantages. We also compete for the same AVSs. We have an AVS here today, Matan from eOracle. So having said all this and having given you guys a very brief overview of what is LRT, what is Eigen, what is restaking, should we not be in a bull run world right now? How do LRTs actually grow? Well, there's actually two ways that we can grow. So one way is to increase our native APR by getting rewards from these AVSs. Having had conversations with multiple AVSs, these rewards should start to kick in the next quarter. So why is it important to have an elevated native APR? Well, for starters, if our native APR is sitting at 7% to 8%, then users don't necessarily need to go and re-engage in DeFi because that can be good enough for some people. Having a native APR that is elevated gives the user more borrowing power. So if I was to go in a lending market and use my RSETH as a collateral to borrow ETH or STETH, I would be making more profit per loop. It's important that I included this in the slide because looping is a very big part of the LRT space. Actually, most of the assets are pledged in leverage loop positions via Aave, Compound, Morpho. And the equation is fairly simple. So it's the native APR of the asset minus the borrowing APR if we're borrowing ETH. Now, if we're borrowing STETH, we also have to subtract the staking yield of STETH or like Rocket Pool ETH, which is 3%. So you can imagine that having a higher native APR in a bull run is extremely helpful. Quick note here on vaults. So in the spirit of how do LRTs grow, so Kelp got a little sophisticated back in August. We realized that, okay, so we're issuing this asset RSETH to users, and then we're asking the users to go and explore the plethora of yield opportunities across different L2s, and most of them want to farm airdrops. So we kind of coined the term farming fatigue, and we wanted to essentially have a single point of entry where users can deposit their RSETH and essentially have exposure to multiple airdrops. And that's essentially how AGETH came about, which is Airdrop Gain Vault. We ran that vault to 200 million, again, when ETH was doing great. It's still very elevated now, but essentially these initial partners that we had were Linea, Scroll, Karak. We've included more partners now like Swell, Circuit, Hemi. So it's essentially if you want to farm different L2s as an RSETH holder, we give you the privilege of having a single point of entry, no complications. We went then to release 3 other vaults. So we have the HGETH vault, High Gain Vault, that's managed by Edge Capital. That vault is currently sitting at around 12K ETH. We've also launched Grizzly Gain Vault. This is an interesting one. So this was essentially how we entered Berachain. It wasn't by saying, hey, Berachain, like we want to issue RSETH on Bera, and then we'll kind of figure it out. We essentially spoke to a lot of protocols on Bera, and we're able to negotiate a good multiplier for our users. And now all our users have to do is deposit their RSETH to farm all of these protocols on Bera. Again, single entry point, multiple airdrops, and a lot of yield. The latest vault that we have is the Move Gain Vault. So this was with Movement, and we actually maxed out our cap at 25 million. So more vaults to come. We're looking to work more with early ecosystems like L2s and also stable issuers, yield-bearing stable issuers. That's pretty much it. All right. Hope you guys were able to learn something, and feel free to ask me any questions.